Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us at today's event, Neurodiversity, Better Understanding Neuroatypical People. I am Fatima, and I will be your moderator. So we're holding this event both here at EPFL, and we also have people joining us online. So welcome, everyone. We have here with us 4 panelists. Dr. Chiara Ferrantini, Dr. Joseph Schofanek, here joining us online, Galina Limorenko, and Pierre van der Genst. Thanks for being here with us. Our event is going to last about an hour and a half, and it's divided in 3 parts. The first part is about 45 minutes, where we're going to listen to presentations from Dr. Fiorentini and Dr. Schofanek. And then we're going to move on a conversation with Galina and Pierre that will last around 20 minutes. And then finally, we're going to dedicate the last 20 minutes to questions and answers, both here and also online. So let's just dive in. Dr. Fiorentini, you are a psychologist and a psychotherapist specialized in neurodevelopmental conditions. Can you tell us, what is it that we call neurodiversity?
So that's actually the topic of this short presentation that I'm going to give you. It's going to be a little bit of an overview of what we call neurodiversity, even though there is a little bit of a few difference in what people might mean by it. So we are going to have an overview of possible point of view. Okay, so let's imagine that you have some blocks for children. And then you take 3 different children. So you can have Joe, and you can have, I don't know, Martin, and you can have Michael, okay? So with the same set of blocks, these 3 children might want to play in very different ways. For instance, our Joe can play in what we would call a typical way. So he would try to build something with this block, make a construction, a house, a train, a village. Then you have Martin, who is a very active, energetic, and creative boy, and he would like to use the block to jump in and out of them and throw them around his playroom. Like this? Okay. And finally, you can have Michael, who could have a lot of fun lining up or stacking up his blocks. And there is no really a right or wrong way to play with the blocks, even though we could say that maybe most children would tend to play like Joe, like our first child. So, having said that, what is it, neurodiversity? It's the idea, basically, that people experience and interact with the world in many different ways. And these different ways correspond to neurological variations. Neurological variations are enriching and are to be valued and celebrated. This is what the neurodiversity movement maintains. This concerns all of us, in the sense that we all have a slightly different way, a personal way to perceive and to think about the world. However, most brains are similar enough so that we don't have any obvious difference in our functioning. We all tend to perceive time, space, dimensions, sensory experience in a roughly similar way. Sometimes, though, we can have some more fundamental differences. And this is when we talk about, for instance, autism spectrum conditions, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyslexia, dyspraxia, or developmental coordination disorder. So what does that mean when we tend to separate these conditions from all the rest of our brains? It means that in these conditions we see very important fundamental difference in social processing, sensory processing, information processing, communication. And we call them neurodivergent conditions. Having a neurodivergent condition means that we might have a sort of spiky profile of functioning with maybe some very special skills in certain areas that other people, majority of people, don't have, but we might also experience some difficulties in other aspects of our functioning because our functioning does not correspond to the functioning of the majority of people. What does that mean, that we'll experience some issues? It can be better understood if we take what Thomas Armstrong calls the disability culture. If we take this point of view, we understand how really difference have to be considered in the context of the environment where we live in. So his metaphor, that is explained in this book, The Power of Neurodiversity, which is a very easy to read but very interesting book, he used a very interesting metaphor. So imagine that we are in a culture of flowers, and in this culture of flowers, psychiatrists are roses. And in the consultation room of the psychiatrist, a sunflower steps in, a huge sunflower. And the rose psychiatrist does his assessment and say, I think you have an issue. You suffer from hugeism. And I'm really sorry for you. It could have been treated if you came in early, but now it's too late. But I can explain you how to cope with this. Next, there is a color that comes in, and okay, right away the psychiatrists say, I know what you have. You have a petal deficiency disorder. And, you know, it might be tricky, but there are ways that you can sort this out. And finally, a bluet, a very tiny bluet comes in, and the psychiatrist says, you know, this is a growth issue, it's genetic. There is nothing we can do, there's no cure, but I'm sure you'll find your way. I can, you know, give you some therapy and some tools to deal with that. So what does that mean? That obviously our environment is shaped by the majority of the individuals who live in it, and expectations and context are adjusted to the point of view of these individuals. And not surprisingly, people that have different profiles can experience some issues. In dyslexia, we have issue with literacy, word finding, distractibility. In dyspraxia, we know that we have issue with planning, for instance, coordination, spatial awareness. ADHD comes with difficulties with prioritization, low threshold of frustration, tendency to risk-taking, impulsivity. And in autism spectrum condition, we have issues with social communication, social interaction, perspective taking, and flexibility, for instance. So what do we make of it? Are these really issues? Is this the wrong way to view it? Always Armstrong in his book say we shouldn't really take a Pollyanna view to what were previously called as disorders, meaning these issues can be real, can come with a great deal of suffering in certain cases, and do not need to be minimized. So people need to be helped through their issues. At the same time, if we do not look at the positive of this profile, no change can happen even for the difficult aspects. What are the strengths? What are the positives of these profiles? In dyslexia, people can have an extreme easiness with 3D thought. They are very creative. They have a non-linear kind of thinking. In dyspraxia, people are also creative. They excel sometimes in visual composition. People with ADHD, they are energetic. They have an intense ability to hyperfocus when they are highly motivated. And they are extremely expressive. In autism spectrum condition, people can be very precise, highly procedural. They have a very good eye for detail. They are extremely determined and persistent when they want to reach their own goal. And these are the differences that need to be celebrated and valued. Okay. So, what are the challenges in education and in academia? There is a lot of material out there, and I just made a short survey, an online survey, and I came upon some data, very interesting. I put you the link out there, that show you that there is evidence of a persistent and very clear leak in the education system from secondary school onwards. So what we have is a progressive dropout of students with specific learning difficulties from secondary school to university and then on to academia. I cite specifically data from the STEM education in UK, sorry for the typo, because this is a scientific education, we are at the EPFL, and this is something that can apply. But so when we look at this survey that is from 2018, so we found that in secondary school, about 12% of the students have a specific learning difficulty. At university, only 5% of the students have a specific learning difficulty, and the academics with a disclosed specific learning difficulty are only the 0.5%. Disclosed. We don't know if there are more. But it means that to some extent, it's difficult to talk about having a different functioning if you want to go up in ranking and continue your academic career. Okay. So it's hard to talk about possible adjustments because as I constantly see during my clinical work, adjustment really needs to be person-based and really tailored to the individual who experience certain issues or might want adjustment for certain issues and not for others. But in general, we can say that a lot of neuroatypical profile would prefer a sensory calm environment, would probably do better with predictable routines that have a clear start and end. They tend to like clear and consistent communication where nothing is left unsaid or implicit. They might need additional processing time. They do better when they have more time to think and deliver. In terms of the signage, they would prefer to have written, clear, instruction with visual support sometimes. They need to have a range of material available. So if there is any kind of obstacle from the motor point of view, from the reading point of view, it's not an obstacle anymore because their work can be accessed otherwise. And why not? Maybe they might also need a flexible dress code because they don't deal well with certain texture, or they want to wear all the time the same kind of color. And are we able to allow for this kind of adjustment that even if are small, they might mean a lot for these people? So the idea is there is no right or wrong way to do things. And as Lorna Wing, who is a pioneer of the autism science, used to say, nature never draws a line without smudging it.
Thank you so much, Chiara, for this introduction. And I really loved the examples you gave and the flowers and the nature. Well, now we're curious to know more. We're going to hear now from Dr. Schofanek, who you may all know, quite impressive. I think only a Google search makes us realize how important his work is in this field. And so Dr. Schofanek is a philosopher, an author, and identifies as autistic himself. Dr. Schofanek, you champion inclusion at Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium. So I would like to ask you more about your work and how can we contribute to a more inclusive society, especially in the academic world.
So let's get started. So thank you for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be with you. And I have noticed that there is a sunflower behind me. It's not done on purpose, but maybe it should be a nice sign of that diversity. So let's have together a brief walk in that topic in the field of human diversity throughout the ages. And I would like to share with you a few pictures. So it's not a wholly, so to say, academic presentation. But anyway, I guess that we can learn quite a lot from having those different pictures in front of us, those different stories. So here we have this bit provocative first picture about the development of the human species. The question, of course, is which one is more diverse? The answer is not that obvious. And please do not just assume that we today in 2022, we are better at inclusivity than people, let's say, 100 years ago. It's not that obvious. It requires a kind of proof or demonstration. And we will try to think about that topic a little bit more. Because if you consider traditional folk tales or fairy tales or, all those stories that children used to hear in the days of old. So if you go through the characters, you will notice that there were many people with disabilities or special needs. If you take the very famous, world famous story of Heidi, so Heidi is not a story about a little girl with a goat or whatever. It's not about it. The story is completely built on the issues of special needs. Everyone in the story of Heidi, if you go through the original text of Heidi, everyone has a disability. Of course, there is Heidi herself. She is actually, she has a peculiar disorder. She doesn't sleep at night, and so she is a sleepwalker, actually. And at the end of the 19th century, that was probably the most mysterious and, so to say, awe-inspiring disease, something like schizophrenia today. In those days, people were afraid of ghosts, and that was the environment, the intellectual environment of those days. Then there is the Clara, the small girl called Clara. So Clara, she is wheelchair bound. So that would be today her diagnosis. Then there is Peter, the boy. So Peter today would probably be diagnosed with some kind of learning disorder, maybe with a dyspraxia, dysgraphia, or probably also ADHD. And of course, my favorite character is the grandpa. So in my view, the grandpa is autistic. Nobody really understands why that person lives far from the village. And so, of course, there are gossips that he may have killed someone, but those are just village gossips. And the funny part of the interesting part of the story is that every guy's or every person's disability becomes the strength of the other person. So no one wants to take care of Heidi. So they give her to the only person who will not let her down. It means the grandpa. And so the grandpa will have to learn how to socialize. And the very first time he sees the girl, I mean Heidi, so he has that wonderful sentence, but if she starts to cry, what will I be supposed to do? I mean, that's a great question. But now the grandpa will have to learn how to socialize. Then Peter, because of this ADHD, just breaks down the wheelchair of Clara. So Clara will have to learn how to walk. Clara will become a friend of Heidi. And then the story goes and goes and goes. And at the end of the day, everyone noticed, and I quote the sentence of the grandma who appears at the end of the second book, that actually they were blessed by God. Actually, regardless of the terminology. What's relevant here is that stories were traditionally full of people with disabilities. And it's one of my favorite topics of research, to try to find interesting characters with special needs in ancient times. And there were many of them. So let's go back at the dawn of times. Let's go back to the prehistory times. I mean, the question we can ask to ourselves, how was life of people with special needs in prehistoric times? You may be tempted to answer, oh, that was horrible. Those people were killed instantly. But are you so sure? Because we can find graves from prehistoric times, and we can find skeletons of people from those days, and some people had very severe disorders or diseases or disabilities, and we can prove that those people lived. It means that there was a person or a service or whatever that helped those people, that brought them food or whatever was required. And it's a new field of research, fascinating field of research, I find. And this is one of the books. Let's make some advertisement for free, of course. The Prehistory of Autism is one of those books that dwells into this topic and tries to reconstruct some roles of people with autism or even other peculiarities in the prehistoric times. So just because our time is very short, just let's take one example. Let's look at those very, very beautiful drawings. You certainly have already seen those drawings. Let's think together about the profile of the person who made those drawings. First point, the mammoth, the woolen mammoth, is far too big to get into, so to say, the cave. You know, the cave is quite narrow. The corridors of the cave are pretty narrow. So the woolly mammoth will not fit into the corridors. If you look at the other animals, they will just not enter the cave and just stop in front of you so that you can draw them. They will just eat you, or, you know, so that's not a good idea. In order to make those very precise drawings, and precise even to the level of the details of the ear, you have to have an excellent visual memory. People usually overestimate grossly their visual memory. If I tell you, just close your eyes and try to imagine the Eiffel Tower in Paris, you will say, of course, that's easy. But if I can ask you, how many pieces of metal do you see? So you will probably not be able to answer the question, because actually people don't really have the visual memory that goes into fine details, but some people have it. And across the autistic spectrum, we have some people like that. But let's take another clue. In those days, you had to learn how to draw, for example, with a charcoal by yourself. It takes thousands and thousands of hours until you reach this level of mastery of the charcoal technique. So let's just ask yourself, life used to be quite short at those times. So if you wanted to draw very nice things, you had to really use your whole lifespan just to learn how to draw. Who actually wants to do that? Who wants to spend their entire life in a cave which is humid, dark, gloomy, instead of playing or having fun with other people under the sun? You know, it's a very specific human profile we are talking about. And we could also add many more clues, but our time is short. So maybe some of those drawings actually were done by people, how to say, on the spectrum. Well, that's a hypothesis, but not an entirely arbitrary hypothesis. Let's skip a few thousands of years in time, and let's start with the discovery of writing. So here in front of us, we have an example of a text in Sumerian. Sumerian is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, written language on Earth. Actually, what we see now, dear friends, is quite small in real life. In real life, what we see right now has probably the size of an ID card, something like that. And so you may already notice how much the person had to be focused on tiny little details. If you want to write in ancient Sumerian, you have to use a kind of small hammer or a kind of, so to say, a mallet. And then you have to tap, this tablet of clay. And if you just make a little mistake, it changes, the whole meanings of the sentence, and you have to start all over again. So first of all, you have to be a person wholly dedicated to details. Then the second point actually is that those scribes who were the only one who mastered the reading and writing, the scribes actually created systems of writing, but not in order to write everything and anything. They developed a written language only for specific topics. And actually, great scientists, especially German scientists in the 19th century, they were quite shocked when they started deciphering those ancient languages, when they noticed that actually those systems were not complete. In Mesopotamia, very roughly speaking, in Mesopotamia, scribes were obsessed with math. And then in ancient Egypt, scribes were obsessed with very, very odd stories of what can happen after your death. But in every case, those people were not able to write, for instance, hello, how are you? Because those people were just not interested in saying hello, who are you? So when you are completely focused on a very specific topic, Well, I mean, that's a quite common feature in autism. And we can maybe have a little thought about it. And also, every early writing system was extremely visual. And having a visual way of thinking is part, so to say, of the game. And maybe also this can be an added clue. Maybe reading and writing was invented by very peculiar people. And just a small story that I love. In China, do you know how writing was invented? Writing was invented by looking at tiny cracks on tortoises, on tortoises' bones, and so who can spend their whole life just looking at tiny cracks, on bones? If you have a child today that does that, and if you take the child to a psychiatrist, well, I don't know what kind of diagnosis will come out. But anyway, just let's skip a few centuries once again, and let's reach the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages were a fascinating period. As you may know, for instance, there were kings in the Middle Ages that were called the bald, the fat, or the mad. Why so? Because the person actually was fat. So it's quite normal to call the king the fat if he is really fat. Try to do it nowadays with some kind of mighty president of whichever country you like. You may end up in jail. So in the Middle Ages, you could have a kind of direct approach to people. And just as a notice, there was no racism in the Middle Ages. Racist theories started many centuries after Middle Ages. So that's also an interesting point. And as regards what we call disability, what was the main, so to say, most common job for people that nowadays we call, let's say, disabled or autistic? Well, there was a job for them, and it was called being a shepherd. If you are a shepherd, the animals just don't care about the way you speak. They don't care about your mastery of Latin grammar or whatever. The animals can be really inclusive. And the other way around, if you are really a social person, if you need to socialize many hours a day, please don't become a shepherd. Otherwise, you will really be disabled. You will have some issues. So there was this job. But in the Middle Ages, what happened to people who were the weirdest of the weird? What happened to people who were not able to become warriors? What happened to people who were not able to become shepherds? What happened to people who had just not the required social skills in order to have a personal, so to say, balanced life? So those people gathered, and they gathered in what we could call today safe spaces, but those places were called in the Middle Ages universitas. And that's how universities, colleges began. Actually, universities and colleges at the first, in the very earliest ages, were just lonely places. We can have this very nice picture of a very lonely house. It's in Sudan, actually. It's the old place of Gondola, so-called Dongola, in Sudan, an extremely remote place. And apparently there lived some very wise people many centuries ago. In the Dark Ages, you have had some people like that. One of the most prominent of them is Beda Venerabilis. He lived in one of the harshest periods of European history. That was a time when you just could not walk a few steps in front of your house without, so to say, being at risk of being killed or badly wounded. Those were very dark times. And so this guy actually spent his whole life just studying grammar and interesting things. And of course, he's a very, so to say, low profile person, so he doesn't talk a lot about himself. But at the end of his most famous book, so the history of English people, well, English, it's very early English. So he defines what is happiness in his mind. And so just to roughly say it with my words, being happy for him, it means every day to sing, always to learn, always to teach, and always to write. You know, that's a nice definition of happiness. And slowly, slowly, over time, more and more people joined this kind of weird safe spaces or safe spaces for weird people. And that's how colleges started. And if you have a look at medieval documents about early universities and colleges, you just are stunned to notice how bad the living standards were, because all those great masters in Latin grammar, they were very knowledgeable, of course, in their topic, but they were apparently even not able to have some hot food, a hot meal. And so they just they did not have the level of autonomy that you would expect from, so to say, a normal or average person. And most of the medieval official documents related to universities actually are documents that try to protect those very marginal, very, so to say, socially awkward people from hunger, from evil persons or evil people. And actually kings and the nobility viewed those scientists as some sort of very fragile people with special needs. And even although those colleges were created, colleges as places of life in common, where you could share some soup or hot meal at the end of the day with very strict rules, of course, autistically strict rules. Even though those colleges were progressively stepped up, even though all those efforts have been made, some people from the academia ended up as beggars or vagrants. And there is a very fascinating book, that's the Book of Vagrants, or Liber Vagatorum, if you want to say it in Latin, written at the very end of the Middle Ages or the beginning of the Renaissance period. And in this book, you have all kinds of vagabonds or vagrants that used to live in those days. And this book actually was edited by Martin Luther. Yes, Martin Luther in person was very interested in lives of vagrants. And one of the chapters of this book is actually devoted to vagrants with an academic background, so to say smart vagrants. And those vagrants actually they built what is considered today many knowledge or dictionaries, and they were part of nowadays academia. And quite funny story is that at the end of the chapter, the author says, don't give them any money, you know, because for many reasons. So if you want to have a look at this book. So the main point for us is to try not to make the university more inclusive, because it has already been so. Our main duty is to recreate the university as it used to exist in the times of old. And maybe we have this peculiar duty to also give a future to all those people who may have become vagrants or vagabonds because they were not given the required opportunities or the required, so to say, assistance. Just as a last question before the conclusion, why, in your opinion, why have those universities stuck to Latin language during so many centuries? They could have used another language. The real reason, in my view, is that in the academic Latin, you just cannot translate everything that makes the social interactions of non-autistic people so joyful or so meaningful. You cannot just translate into academic Latins all the private jokes, all the wink, wink, nod, nod, the smiles and the innuendos that most people without autism use. So if you switch to academic Latin, you will not notice that your famous professor actually is disabled. And there is this person, Heinrich Rickert, he was one of the most famous philosophers of the German academia at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. He used to tell to his students, if you want to say something to me, first of all, translate it into your head in Latin. And if you do not translate it into Latin, if you cannot translate it into Latin, don't say it to me. Because by translating it in Latin, everything that made him special just disappeared. That's the point. And so at the end of my short talk, I would like to share a very brief fable with you. It's not a La Fontaine fable, but it could be. So it's a fable with 3 animals and 1 ghost. Well, so let's start with the animals. So there is the Komodo dragon. So the Komodo dragon is a giant lizard. It could be called a dinosaur. I have been told that dinosaurs disappeared or died many millions of years ago. How did that giant lizard survive until nowadays? Do you have an idea? Well, because he had found the perfect place for him. I mean the island of Komodo. And so whoever you are, I'm pretty sure that there is a space that perfectly fits your needs, and you will not even appear disabled when you are there. That's what we call the social model of disability. Social model of disability means that the true and direct reason of disability is not a medical condition. It's a part of the environment. And in the field of autism, a very famous person, actually the person who created the PECS method, Schopler. Schopler used to say, and he was one of the first in the field of autism who noticed it, that if you create a right environment for children with autism, they will not even appear disabled. So that's the lesson of the dragon. Then there is a parrot called Kakapo. He's a very nice parrot, very lovely, but unfortunately, his brain did not evolve in the proper way, and he's considered one of the most stupid animals on earth. And this parrot actually is described in various books as slow, fat, and stupid. Well, if some friend calls you that way, I guess it's not your real friend. But there is one point I have to mention. Where does this very lovely parrot live? So the parrot lives in the very nice mountains of southern New Zealand. So that's the place where people used to go and to spend some of the best periods of their lifetime. So that's where the parrot lives. So let's just ask ourselves, who is stupid and who is very smart? The parrot lives a very long life, happily, in a very lovely place, or some humans who consider themselves very smart, but who is just spent sometimes in awful conditions their whole life, just among walls of concrete, So who is smart, who is stupid? So that's the question of the parrot. And then comes the third animal, that's the lobster. I don't know if you are aware of it, but the lobster has very strong social skills. A lobster has a very direct and strong feeling of social hierarchy. So contrary to many people with autism and partly contrary to myself, the lobster could actually evolve and move in a mostly human society. If you are autistic and you apply for a job and you enter the room of the CEO, you mean the very highest ranking boss, and if you do what a smell when you enter the office of the CEO, you will probably not have the job. Why? Because your social skills should tell you that the office of the CEO actually has a very nice fragrance. So a lobster would successfully have unemployment on these criteria. But at the end of the day, the lobster has great social skills, but at the end of the day, someone will eat the lobster. So in my view, it's better to be the parrot, the so-called stupid parrot. And the last, so to say, creature, it's not an animal, it's a creature. Actually, it's a ghost. You may have heard of this very nice ghost, Casper. I like Casper a lot. What's the aim of Casper? Casper wants to have friends. But unfortunately, he does many efforts. But he cannot make friends. Why? Because everyone is afraid of him. And whenever I see the picture of Casper, I always am thinking about those children with autism who desperately try to have friends, and all those experts who say that the child doesn't want to have friends. Actually, the truth is, the bitter truth is that other children don't want to play with the first child. Well, and do you remember when exactly Casper will manage to have friends? That's when he will understand one great lesson of life. You will have friends. You will be included when you attempt to help others. So there is the story of the Boy Scout and the huge bear. There is a huge bear that wants to eat the small Boy Scout. So the scout is running, and the bear is, of course, mighty and very fast. And so when the bear is on the verge of eating the Boy Scout, Casper appears. The bear gets scared, runs away, and so the Boy Scout is saved. And that's when the Boy Scout understands that Casper is a friend. And that's exactly what I'm trying to tell to my friends with special needs. Try to help other people. Be always positive, as Casper is. And I think the philosophy of life of Casper is vastly superior to the philosophy of life of other ghosts who just want to scare humans by saying boo, 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 if you remember the beginning of the movie. And as a very last sentence, actually, I like the sentence from the Swiss Constitution, and the sentence can be, of course, said as follows: the strength of a people is measured by the well-being of its weakest members. And it's not about being just nice and to give them money or food, but it's about just the simple and factual point that we need those people in order to have a working society. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Schofanek, for this playful and insightful presentation. I think we will all look and read fairy tales and go to museum in a different way right now. So thanks a lot for that. We will get to ask, so Dr. Schofanek is going to stay with us, so we will get to ask him some questions at the end. We're reaching now the end of our presentation part. So I invite you to move to a conversation with Galina and Pierre. So Galina here is a doctoral assistant and student at EPFL, and Pierre works here too, and he is the dad of an autistic child. So let's hear from you first, Galina. Can you tell us about your journey and what led you to advocate for better inclusion of neurodiverse people?
Thank you. So yes, I am a PhD student and doctoral assistant here at EPFL. I study neurobiology, so I'm studying Alzheimer's disease. Well, everything that you heard in the presentations, I do resonate, not with everything, but with the most things. So I am essentially, so that's my second career as it is. So I actually started working with horses, and I was a horse riding instructor, and that's the area which was much easier for me to navigate rather than navigating people. It was easier to navigate this realm. But then again, once it got to navigating society on that level, that was a little bit more difficult, basically. However, knowing what I know, and I had a privilege to know quite early that I had some developmental issues, which again are not just the social manifestations of these disorders, but there's definitely a big part of it which is much more hidden. So something like sensory processing, issues with gastrointestinal processing. So these kind of things are really important for us to put forward as well, because it's not only something that concerns other people, how people perceive us or how they communicate with us. It's just a part of it, but the rest of it can be much more debilitating when you find yourself in a different environments. So once I kind of find myself in this specific scientific environment, that's something that I know that I thrive in. So that's something that I can really kind of put my contribution to society. And we know that in many scientific fields, there are so many people who have autistic spectrum traits, so they're not specifically autistic. Perhaps they're not diagnosed or never kind of went on to seek the diagnosis, but they really have these kind of traits who are very focused on details and just really getting down to the bottom of the things. However, once I'm in this area and I realize that systemically it's really difficult to navigate for people who have specific needs, and the ingrained structures within the academia and our universities, they do not really allow for this sort of wiggle around. Even though we know that we should be allowing these people to thrive, it's very difficult to navigate this space, and you're always coming across the barriers you have to be jumping over. And just thinking about how the way we perceive our surroundings. For example, it's really difficult to turn things off. So now we're sitting in a room, we're hearing so many different noises, I cannot switch them off, I hear everything, and I have to have a conscious effort to filter it. And then once over that, you have to put all the pressures of navigating this environment, it becomes very difficult. So just bringing this conversation down to what specific individuals would need, and even on the general level, how people say, like, we're canaries in a coal mine. If something is really wrong for somebody, we are the first ones to feel it. So it can be differences in temperature in office, differences in the noise levels. Like, I work in a biochemical laboratory. There's just noise all the time. You've got your machines, they're always on. It's impossible to turn off. So even having something like noise cancelling headphones or some other quiet areas, it's not always available for everybody. So I think I'm very privileged to be in this position to actually turn attention to these questions. For some people, it can seem like, oh, it doesn't really matter, we just deal with it, but we cannot, and many of us just drop out, and it's easier. It's just easier not to be battling every day for something that should be available, something that is available for many, but for us, it's a little bit more difficult.
Thanks so much, Galina, for sharing. I believe some of it resonates with you, Pierre. As a parent of a neurodiverse child, you face some challenges. Can you share some with us?
Yes. Well, in fact, if I get to think of it, these are the challenges that every parent faces, but maybe magnified by differences, and the fact that differences are not very much accepted in society. Nothing's well organized for people who are different. But the first challenge was just, understanding what was going on. I could see my son was different, but I didn't understand it. Getting, shall I say, a diagnosis or something that would explain. That was the first challenge. It's not so easy. It's not like somebody will tell you, go there, and they will tell you what's going on. It wasn't as easy as that. 10 years ago, the Cantonal Center for Autism was just starting. Then once that was done, I thought, I was actually happy the day a specialist told me, oh, well, your son has ADHD. I thought, okay, so now there's a framework around it that's going to kick in, and my life's going to be simpler, and his life's going to be probably simpler, but there was none of that. So you have to understand, how you organize school. Is he going to school? What kind of school? Then you realize there's no school, that the best possible schools, there's 1 or 2 in the canton, and then there's a wait list of 2 years. And what do you do during 2 years? Then there's all the issues that Galina described. You go to the shop and then you just ask people, would you turn down the music in the shops because there's no need for all this noise and it's disturbing. And then people look at you like you're an alien because we're all used to going shopping and there's all the televisions flashing here and there. And the music is completely useless and it's disturbing for some people. So I spent 2 years asking Migros to have 1 hour in the morning where we could go shopping, like it's done in the UK or some places, with basically no answer. And then the last challenge, I think is the most important, is that I'm just realizing that right now, is that it's not about me. So I've just spent the last 10 years trying to understand, what should I do to organize his life, etc. And then I'm just starting to realize that it's about him. I should just try to understand what he wants to do, what he wants to become, and just be a support for that. And so I'm just starting to realize, he's an independent person. He's going to be a teenager. That's going to be funny, by the way. And I'm in this position now of, trying to wonder, okay, tell me what you want to become and how I can help. And that's the third challenge. That's a big one as well.
Thanks, Pierre. Yeah, your answers may be just sitting at home, actually, so you will have them all. Galina, just to build on what Pierre just said, how can we move from awareness to creating the enabling environment that Dr. Chofanek was describing? Do you have any practical tips?
Yeah, and just to address something that Pierre said, so I completely understand exactly where you're coming from, and for many parents as well, quite few of them feel that they're not doing enough, that there's something like a special thing that we can do that will fix everything. But of course, that's not the case. And quite often as well, for many autistic people, we don't want to put ourselves onto somebody, become somebody else's problem as it is. We're not seeking, for example, to be told that, yeah, you're autistic, that's fine. It's not the case. We just want to be in an environment that will work for us, for everyone else. And that's why I had to advocate for exactly specific things that I find that work for me. But it's not always the case that everybody has awareness what exactly is working. So it's always good to have a psychiatrist as a doctor to be able to kind of go through all of these little things, what specifically works for you. So in EPFL, we have the service, which is psychiatry service, which I found really useful. You can have first sort of talk for free with the psychiatrist, and it works perfectly well. So I would encourage everybody to look up on the website as well. And one of the greatest sort of tips I found is that people have to be hearing and listening to people, because especially in academic labs, there's very strong hierarchical structure, and there's a lot of legacy as well, settings within the lab. It's not easy to change your old professors' ways of doing things. So there might not be very sort of malleable to change within the structures. So it's really listening to your staff who want to come forward to you and actually allow to implement these small changes. Like we all went through the pandemic and we had to take Zoom calls, we had to take Zoom conferences. That was fascinating, and everybody just, went and did it. And even somebody who before would say that, no, there's no way. And many of neuroatypical people found it so much more easy to participate within the discussion. And how hard is it to have Zoom and in-person meeting? Because in-person meeting can be so difficult. So then you have such a huge pool of potential. And then you have some very silly little things that can act as barriers for people to overcome. So you have to be listening to people and really identify what specific things are the barriers. So in-person big meetings can be a barrier, Zoom can help solve it. So it's a little thing, but it does actually make a difference.
Thanks, Galina, and thanks also for mentioning the pandemic, because actually a lot of people, I guess, realized that they were feeling maybe safer in that space rather than, so the pandemic also helped to make some people realize that. Pierre, let me get back to you. Why is it so important to create this enabling, inclusive environment?
Well, first of all, it's a question of fairness. I think there would be the trivial answer would be it's a question of fairness. Everybody deserves a chance to, sit in the lab, as Galina was saying. So that's one. But I think, if I think of it, we face pressing problems. Right? Shall I just mention a few, like global warming, for instance? So if the world has been tailored and governed by neurotypical people for a long time, so the conclusion is that they failed, right? So if we want to solve these problems, we probably need to have different people looking at the problem, and the more different angles we have, the more successful we might just be. And so if you tell me that, I can suddenly recruit 100 different people with 100 different ways of thinking at the same problem, it's more likely that we will find a solution. And so they're outside the walls of academia because we've not been able to accommodate these people. We just let talent outside of our walls, and that's a shame. So if we build something inclusive, it's a little bit selfish. It's because more talent, more ideas, problem solved.
Thanks. Yeah, that's easy. Galina, I would like to ask you just like one last question from a gender perspective. How is neurodiversity experienced? Is it different?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and it for sure is, and especially for women, it's really, for quite a long time, the autism has not even been considered that much of a inclusive disorder or a sort of spectrum diagnosis, and women would not be even diagnosed because the symptoms present very, very differently, and we tend to mask many of the symptoms. So when you put that on top of already existent issues within the fields, for example, it becomes so much more difficult, firstly, to advocate for yourself, and then to actually get results from advocating, to get where you want, and to build the environment that you could thrive in. And you can imagine it just compounds on the leaky pipeline of women in science and specifically in technology fields.
Thanks so much, Galina. Thank you both for sharing your powerful and inspiring stories. We are now coming at the end of our presentation and testimonies. I would like to give you the floor, the audience here and also online. So please feel free to ask your questions. We will take them 3 by 3, so we can start by our audience here, and then we can move to the online part. Just raise your hand.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was quite emotional. I was just curious to understand. I'm facing that in the family, and I see youngsters hiding it. And I'm just wondering, is it always the case? Do people who have autism...
I'm not sure everyone can hear
sorry,
you.
that's my fault. Okay. The question is it a habit for people who tend to have these differences to hide them? Is it a generality or not? I've seen that around me, and I'm curious about that. Why? Is it because we don't talk enough about that, or is it simply a way of trying to compensate all the time? And it's still difficult in 2022 to actually identify these issues at an early stage.
Thank you. Maybe we can already start answering this question. Maybe Dr. Fiorentini, do you feel?
I think this is a very important question, and it's a question that can be answered at many levels. So if you take the individual that comes with a neurodiverse condition, for instance, autism, obviously you should ask them personally, but when they recall their experience, they tend to describe, and especially in women, this phenomenon has been found and studied, that they tend to mask to a certain extent, maybe to a great extent, their particularities. And they do that both in a conscious way, like they know that something can come across as weird, or they fear how it might be accepted and they try to hide it, or in an unconscious way, in the sense that they are socialized from an early age to know that a different way of behaving is more socially acceptable, and then they try to mimic their peers behaving in a certain way, and maybe they don't know anymore that they are copying, but they are just taking up the behavior of somebody else that they consider good in doing certain things like social interactions. And this is considered like a specific phenomenon within, for instance, the field of autism, but there are also scientists who tend to endorse a different view, saying, well, think about yourself, think about you having any kind of mental health issue, could be depression or could be anxiety. Like, wouldn't you want to hide it when you go to work, or even when you go to see your psychiatrist? Would you tell the full extent of your symptoms, or would you have maybe days when you say, okay, actually, I'm doing fine, and then where you are at home, then you can be fully yourself, then you have no problem being maybe at the worst of your suffering. So maybe hiding or camouflaging or masking is something that we all tend to do if we have something that we do not want people to see. And this is the other way of seeing this issue. And then there is a third way, who has more to do with the culture and the social stigma that can be associated to certain conditions. So it is true that we are getting better at diagnosing it, and the prevalence rate is constantly increasing, probably because of that, to the great extent. But at the same time, families are scared, and rightly so, because the word that we give them is disorder, is still disorder. And maybe they prefer, I don't know, ADHD to autism, or they prefer none of them. So should I really get a diagnosis for my child? And when you meet families, you have to tell them, look, if we do this, the answer might come with this label. Do you want this label? And of course you want them to have the label because it's a ticket entry to care. But is it really? Or are we just giving labels and we are not giving care? Because if that's the case, then what's the point of me having a label if I can't access what I need? So now I think we are shifting from the disability culture I was pointing out before to a strength and difficulties point of view. But it's hard because we are used to think that we are the right way to do things. So I think we should really question ourselves, and if we started to talk about, I don't know, Scandinavian people, like people who have a deficiency in, I don't know, altitude. I mean, we would be considered as racist, but we do not have any issue as calling all of this condition as disorder, because there are things they need to be helped with. But at the same time, probably we didn't spend enough time looking at the things that they do differently than us, better than us. And the first step is really to start thinking that they are just different and not less. And with the right environment, they can thrive and even excel.
Thank you, Chiara. That's a beautiful message of hope. Anyone else?
Hello. My question is, do you think that the fact that women, when they're neurodiverse, could be ADHD, ASD, or different kind of things, we don't show a lot of examples of women like this in society. And so it's complicated to identify yourself with women who are like you. So I think that what we show is very important to women, because masking is going, I think, with the fact that you're scared because you say, if I'm not masking, I'm going to be different, but I don't see other women like me. So it can be very difficult to not mask when you're conscious that around you there are not a lot of examples of women. That we see a lot of examples of men with autism or ADHD, but examples of women, it's starting since several years, but I think it's not belonging to, you think it has an impact, the fact of masking and the fact that we cannot really identify ourselves with the examples. I don't know if my question is clear.
I think you're pointing to a very important point, which is the creation of role models, right, that who don't exist right now. So maybe Galina, would you like to reflect on this?
Yeah, so excellent questions, and your question is really good, and I think from my perspective I can add also that it's much more pragmatic, I think, on my side, because you have to mask not to be bullied, and that's a huge issue, especially with children. Children can be very, very difficult to accept different, and it's very difficult with the bullying. Your question about role models, that's an excellent point. We need to see these women out there. So somebody like Temple Grandin, for example, she's a very big spokesperson in the field, but it's just her. I mean, there's not that many afterwards. So also you have to understand that for many people, many people don't really need to look at somebody and then think that, yes, I would like to be like them. What we need to really feel that we are accepted whatever we are. So our autism can be manifesting differently to the autism of someone else. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that we are not worthy of acceptance compared to someone else, and our autism have to look exactly like someone else's autism. That's just ridiculous. So just these little things, they're really important, and seeing different kind of manifestations of autism or other disorders, you have to also take into account that autism quite often is comorbid with different other disabilities. So for example, I have obsessive compulsive disorder, which goes at a quite high overlap between these two conditions, and other people have different things which again contribute to your autism manifesting differently. So the more we see these kind of people speaking out and really talking about the way they perceive the world and how they are being like looked at and perceived by the world, well, hopefully it's going to be better for everyone.
Thank you, Galina. Dr. Ferrantini, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, from the scientific point of view, it's true that in autism history and science, we really didn't talk or consider the possibility that there would be women on the spectrum. If you take the classical studies of Kanner and Asperger, there are basically no girls in the samples that were described. And then so forth, if you think about autism, the idea that you have in mind is just like a young boy lining up blocks. And also a young boy, like for a lot of time, we also tended to exclude a little bit adults from the research and focus on young children. There are women out there, and actually we started to found them when we realized that there were a lot of teenagers that came to consult for a range of issues, of mental health issues that could be eating disorder, or could be OCD, or could be like self-harm, and they were really suffering. And then we saw that the underlying problem probably was a neurodevelopmental disorder that maybe was not the root cause of everything, but certainly put everything in a different perspective. And since then, mothers sometimes of this girl started to recognize themselves in the picture, and they started more and more to refer their own daughters, because they really felt, I don't want them to go through and to have to endure what I had to endure, not being acknowledged for what I am. This is 2015. So it's very, very recent, and probably it's a bit too early to start talking about role models, but if we were opening up a little more our, flexibility in terms of accepting different profiles, probably there would also be less need of role models altogether.
Thanks. Next question.
It's a little bit difficult to speak English in front of you, but I will say just something. Because I was diagnosed, if I can use this word, 2 years ago, concerned by being autistic. And I want to say that not knowing that I am concerned with this kind of sensibility nearly killed me. But because I was just living aside from myself, not like me. And I developed a very huge camouflage, and it was really heavy, and all kind of terms. And I developed a kind of personage really funny, and I have ability to speak, but it was so heavy to live each day among normality, what we are calling normality. And I want to say that's important to know. I'm not for giving some labels, autist, and to be just focused on that, but just to know about different sensibility and to be able to manage with that. So that I just want to say that.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing. This is powerful and emotional. Maybe Dr. Chovanec, would you like to, I don't know if you heard this, would you like to react?
Yes, sure. And I believe in the chat there is a question for me about education with children with special needs or with autism. So I believe that a frequent mistake is that to think that if you give some classes to children with autism, they will become children without autism. And you find also this kind of belief in several advertisements. Some people claim they are coaches and they can coach an autistic person and make the person become non-autistic. And of course, some businesses are very interested and keen on making this business thrive. But of course, it's fully, unsubstantiated, and I do not think that you can just turn in a kind of quote-unquote conversion therapy, sorry for using the term, an autistic person into a non-autistic. And some interesting papers actually tend to show that the most miserable and the unhappiest adults with autism are those who had the most hours of social skill teaching. I mean, don't misunderstand me. Social skills are required, and we should give as many as possible, especially to children with autism. But please do not believe that with those social skill classes, children with autism will become non-autistic children. And please do not believe that the pinnacle of human life is only socializing. You know, there are so many good and great things we can do in our lives, autistic or non-autistic. It's not just about socialization. You know, socialization is quite difficult. And if I may just very briefly tell a funny story, there was a great German philosopher, probably with autism, and his name was Schopenhauer. I know, he's not a very nice person, but anyway. And so he used a very nice story, the story of porcupines. You know what a porcupine is? So actually porcupines are very social animals. They like to socialize. The only problem, just figure out how can two porcupines get very close to each another. So the porcupines have created a kind of socializing, but with a distance. So they don't get exactly in the vicinity of each other. And so what the porcupines do, we humans called it being polite or civilized. You know, so you can socialize at times, but not very close. You can just go rather in the vicinity of someone, but don't just stick on the other person. And you are not supposed to socialize all the time. Follow the lead role model of porcupines. Well, that's just a funny story. I don't know if it's suitable, but I find it nice anyway. So yes, we can socialize, but in a kind of controlled and need-based environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chovanec. Maybe we can take one or two more questions here in the room. We're lucky enough to still have this room, so if that's okay, I think it's an important topic. We're hearing very interesting questions, so we can take maybe 5-10 minutes more, if that's okay. Anyone else would like to ask a question?
So my question would be, you've talked about ASD and ADHD and other neurodiversities as separate so-called disorders, but I've learned that up until recently it wasn't possible to be diagnosed with 2 or more of those neurodiversities, and that in the DSM-5, I think from since 2013 it's possible to be diagnosed both ASD and ADHD, and so my question is, what would that look like? Because sometimes people describe those as very opposite disorders. So like, for example, autistic people are very focused, and ADHD, people who have ADHD are all over the place. So how does that affect the life or the behavior of someone who has both, for example? Thank you.
I guess that's a question for Dr. Fiorentini.
I think it's a question it's impossible to answer in the sense that it's true that with the DSM-5 we can diagnose, for instance, ADHD in the context of ASD. It's also true that we cannot really talk about a specific presentation without falling into more or less a stereotype that doesn't coincide with, you know, a specific person that can have both ASD and ADHD. For instance, in what you just mentioned about ADHD, people not being all over the place or not being able to focus, that's not entirely true, because ADHD people can actually hyper-focus when they are highly motivated. So they can have a more diffuse kind of attention, but still a very capable attention. They are not always impaired in all aspects of attention, but maybe in one specific or 2 specific aspects of attention. It can come with hyperactivity or without hyperactivity. So already within a specific condition, there is a lot of diversity. When you have 2 conditions together or more, it can even become difficult to be able to exactly diagnose which conditions the individual is suffering from. Also because there are overlapping aspects, in the sense that there are aspects, for instance, linked to social processing or sensory processing that are shared by multiple conditions. Both ADHD kids and children with autism have issues with social skills, with social interactions, maybe for slightly different reasons, but it might be hard to disentangle the presentation when you actually see the person interacting or during a clinical evaluation. So you do the best you can. You try to give the specific diagnosis that meets and answer to the person needs, to the best of your knowledge. And then there are always going to be aspects that are not always well explained or well met.
That's a really excellent question, and that's something that, especially psychiatrists, they battle quite a lot, isn't it? Which condition it is. So I can just give you my personal example, for example. So I am autistic, but I have also OCD, which is an issue. So the OCD, obsessive-compulsive, it manifests very differently in autistic people compared to people who are not autistic. So there's a big question of which symptoms are from autism and which symptoms are OCD, which have to be addressed. So, for example, as Dr. Chovanec already said, we don't have to fix autistic people to be non-autistic. That's impossible because it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, and I know that I have processing issues within the brain, so my motor cortex does not talk to my olfactory part, for example, and so that's something you cannot fix it. But when we look then through the symptomatology, say with my psychiatrist, and we think like, okay, you just spent 8 hours going through your code and you achieved something, so you've written what you had to write, it's fine. fine. But then if next time I was watching the lecture series on YouTube and the Robert Sapolsky, he was given lectures in Stanford, which are free to watch on YouTube. So I was listening to that, and he said that in order for you to learn cellular automata, you have to spend 7 days, the whole week, just learning that. So there was I for the whole week. I was not eating, I was not showering, I was just doing the cellular automata, and then my psychiatrist told me that this is not normal. Well, which is it? So it has to be very specific for a specific patient, and then going from the baseline, then you can determine what is which what is which condition, and of course they're overlapping. There's no clear-cut lines, as Dr. Yasi said before. Nature doesn't have the clear-cut lines.
Thanks, Galina, for sharing. Now we can move to the online questions. So, Dr. van der Gens, there is a question for you. The current metrics and performance and success in the academia are quite narrow and limited. Do you see any good and practical alternatives in a way to encourage neurodiversity?
Oh, that's a tough one. It's not just the metrics of academia that are very narrow. I mean, academia is a reflection of society as a whole. I was lucky or unlucky, I don't know, to be in charge of the whole education system at EPFL for a number of years. And one thing that impairs welcoming diverse people into a school like this one is, I think, a profound misunderstanding of something very important, which is equality of treatment. So everything is based on equality of treatment. Say, oh, we can do different things for different people. It's like we have to treat everybody exactly the same way. The rules are the rules. You have to do this and that, and if you behave in a different way, you can't make it to EPFL because, no, we have to treat everybody fairly. And I think that's a profound misunderstanding of what equality of treatment means. Equality of treatment means we should be able to adapt more to people. And so the first thing to completely reinvent is that. Is this fundamental issue with this idea that we have to treat everybody in the same way, where around us, everybody's pretty much different. So the first thing to change would be that. If we put ourselves in the right mindset, that no, everybody's not the same, and it's not mistreating people to adapt to each and every of them in the most possible way, then I think we will successfully change the system.
That's a really excellent point, and I also would like to add to that with specific example again from my own experience. So in EPFL, I have to take a few courses to get 12 credits for my PhD. However, I would not take any courses where I would have specific requirements like test or the group work which has to be done. So again, I don't think it has to be also put on the shoulders of people, neurodiverse people, for them to challenge the specific. So you would not like somebody to go to the professor and say, okay, you have to change all of your course now because this way it doesn't really fit me. Why does it have to be responsibilities of the people who are already kind of have these challenges? We have to think on more structural level to these things, to have options that can benefit everybody, maybe even people who do not identify or are not diagnosed as autistic. They could find themselves much better in one way rather than the other. So it's having an options, and again, canary in a coal mine, it will benefit everybody, you know, for everybody to have this universal design, or however it's called.
Thanks, Galina. And I think it answers the next question that we have online. That was also for Dr. Šofanek. Yeah.
Thank you. If I may just briefly add just one sentence or two, sorry, because the topic is really fascinating. I think we may not be fully aware of the tremendous changes the university went through in the recent decades. You know, nowadays, research means writing papers with cohorts and that will be published in a certain peer-reviewed documents or reviews, and this is a wholly new system. Until recently, being a researcher or being in the academia meant a completely different thing. It meant just being an unusual, weird person who will actually be allowed to work unaccounted for their whole life. The university 1 century ago was absolutely not the thing that nowadays it is. It was not a place for young people to have them learn a job. It was a sort of a small club for a very tiny minority of people who will spend their whole life there studying very unusual things. That was the university for the vast majority of its very long existence. So the duty that befalls on us is enormous. We have to find ways to be inclusive in a completely different environment. But I do believe that we can at least partially make it. Maybe it will be harder in some fields, but it can be easier in others. Some parts of the academia are really hard when you are slightly different. When you are, let's say, with autism. If you study, for instance, general management, there will be 2,000 other students in the room. They will all be, so to say, much more social skilled than you, and they will get the job much better than you at the end of the day. But if you study ancient Ethiopian, so you will be the only student in the room, and the professor will be at least as weird as you. So the professor will think, or the lecturer will think, that you're normal. And at one point of the day, unfortunately, the professor will die. And so the university will have to hire you and only you, because only a handful of people know ancient Ethiopian. So there are still some, I would call them dark or unlikely corners of the academia where neuroatypical students can thrive. And it's just about, so to say, receiving the correct advice in order to start in a field of study that may be more suited for the person. I mean, of course, I would be the first one to wish to have a fully open and inclusive academia, but let's be realistic. In the very short term, we will probably not manage to make the whole academia perfectly inclusive. But there will be some, some shortcuts, some almost tricks for people who are not typical to thrive. And for the perspective of a university, I would say that the best investment of all is to focus resources on those people, because students, future researchers with autism tend to be more faithful. They will not run to another university because they have been offered a higher salary, and they will be also probably able to reach more original idea. Don't forget that Darwin, probably the most famous scientist of the 19th century, was not a student. He was a tramp. He was a vagabond. He was a loser. He was not able to follow classes at the university. But in those days, you could become the greatest scientist of your time, even without being able to stay a student at the university. I think that's a very powerful example. And please do not throw the future Darwins under the bus. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chovanec. I feel you were maybe speaking of experience on ancient Ethiopian as you speak yourself Amharic amongst other many languages. Dr. Fiorentini, there is a question for you on what is being done for autistic adults in our societies, and how can school can actually do better?
I think it's a very, the answer really varies based on the environment you're in. I deal mostly with children, adolescents, and sometimes adults, but the majority of the adults I see are adults that never saw the diagnosis, or oftentimes women that never managed to receive a diagnosis for the reason we talked about before. And most of them report histories where they had to struggle for a lot of different issues, and especially mental health issues like depression, anxiety, or attention issues that were not treated, or even the simple fact of not being able to understand their own functioning. So certainly from the modest point of view that I can have, there is a lot of isolation, even for people that have the potential to lead an independent life and have the skill to attend the university and find their own job. In terms of education and school, and this is the remark I wanted to add after hearing Galina, I think there is probably also still a basic misunderstanding on the notion of support and adjustment that we can provide to neurodiverse people, because we often come from the point of view that we should give support to people that do not have enough skills to perform in a certain way or to a certain level. And even parents of neurodiverse children can come to think that way. And then when you meet them, you need to sort of correct them and say, no, your child doesn't need support because doesn't have the right level. Maybe he's a perfectly bright child. He does need support because he learns differently. And we are not gonna take away that support once he gets the same, results or performs the same way as his peers, because why should he have to adapt learning in a way that is not the right way for him? And the same thing is true when you talk maybe to teachers, and we have this sort of aménagement, so this list of adjustments that work for different kind of condition. You have adjustment for ADHD, you have adjustment for ASD, and these are state approved, so they are mandatory. Once you have a diagnosis, you need to apply them in school. And sometimes you have very proactive teachers that, they do absolutely everything they can to make learning possible for their student, even without having the list of the adjustment. And sometimes they have teachers that answer you, oh no, I cannot redo everything in that way, it takes so much time. Yeah, I know, but you have a student that learns this way, so how are we gonna do about that? So the notion that the way you teach things and you present things should match the possibilities and the preference, in the sense the way you learn better for your students, is not really generally recognized. We tend to think that students need to adapt. Students need to learn, and they need to learn in the way that is best for them. So maybe this is also a notion that school needs to probably integrate more.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time. I think we can speak about this for hours. Dr. Šofanek, do you want to have a last word before we end?
Or maybe just from a very personal point of view, actually, I think I was blessed by Mother Nature. Why? Because I have the opportunity every day to meet fantastic people. And if I were, so to say, undisabled or normal, quote unquote, I would probably have some kind of well-paid job somewhere. but I would certainly not have had the opportunity to meet all those fantastic people. And every day is a discovery, every day is a bless. And at the end of the day, yes, I'm sometimes exhausted after long hours, but my smile is great. And I think that's the power of disability, the power of human diversity is that it makes sense, it gives a meaningful life to other people. And that's maybe why disabled people actually exist. Why do disability exist? Why do disabled person exist? I think that they have, there is a reason for that. And maybe people with special needs are meant to make our lives brighter and maybe better. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. I couldn't end in a better way. I've learned a lot. I hope you did too. And I love this glimpse of hope and inclusion. Please join me thanking our panelists. And we wish you a great evening. Thanks for joining.